Hi, folks. Steve here, and let's talk through the girl behind the name, which is this Amy Winehouse documentary. It's a hell of a film. I've really sort of quite taken and moved by this film in ways that I wasn't expecting myself to be. I'm certainly not an Amy Winehouse fan. I never was an Amy Winehouse fan, and I only actually watched this documentary because I heard just such great things about it. And I think it is one of those films where it doesn't really matter if you're an Amy Winehouse fan or not. The film works so well, and it's so dramatic, and it's so moving that I think everybody walks away thinking this really is a hell of a film, regardless of your own views of Amy Winehouse. And it really does ask a lot of questions about the life of somebody and sort of the network around them and the responsibility that they have to that person. And certainly ethically, the film raises a lot of questions about particular people in Amy's life, and sort of the sad, tragic end to Amy. It doesn't get away from that. The whole film is about the fact that this person died, and the film is sort of blaming without blaming and really unpacking who Amy was as much as how she actually died. But I think what's really important about the film is more than just sort of pointing the finger at particular people. It's also celebrating this immense talent of Amy Winehouse, her immense talents of songwriting, her immense talent of performance, and just this amazing voice, this amazing kind of jazz voice that she had, and why she was so respected by so many people during her life, and also why she remains so respectful now. Okay, so the film opens with this home movie footage, and I think that's really important in just sort of setting up the film and what it's actually doing, and that the whole film will essentially rely on this home movie footage. We don't actually see talking heads in the way that other we see talking heads in other films, like Capturing the Freedmans or A Thin Blue Line. Those films which sort of classically have talking heads and actually heads talking about the home movie footage. We don't see that in a film like this. The whole film is pretty much archival footage, whether that be from home movie footage, personal collections from people in Amy's life, or her performing in concert or on talk shows and things like that. So the whole film is about unscrambling all of these films. Now, there's something very haunting about this home movie footage that opens the film with a very young Amy singing Happy Birthday. And I think there's something about it which is it's clearly very personal. What we're seeing, it was made at a time. It wasn't made for public consumption. This footage, and I think there's something very voyeuristic about it that we don't want to look, but we do want to look, and we're compelled to look. So it's also, in a way, asking questions about the audience's obsession with the private lives of celebrity. Why are we so concerned and interested in the private lives of the celebrity? So it's the film is sort of setting itself up as we are going to go into the lives of the celebrity and the people around her, and it's going to be very uncomfortable in particular ways. And the film, in its own way, is an extremely uncomfortable experience because of the sort of footage that's put out there and the way that the film is commenting on that footage. Now, who is the documentary for? And I think this is really important to establish this. And across the whole course, we've really been asking this: who is the documentary actually made for, and where does the social actor fit into this, and who are the social actors in this film? Now, Amy Winehouse obviously is a key social actor, even though she died before the film was made, and all of the home footage that she appears in was not made for the film, right? But it's used for the film. Now, Mitch, Amy's dad, he always felt that the film should have portrayed him in a positive way. And this is what he said: "The film is representing me in a not very good way. There is no balance. It's portraying me and Amy in a not very good light. Half of me wants to say, don't go see it, but then the other part of me is saying, maybe go see the videos, put your headphones in, and listen to Amy's music while they're watching the videos. It's the narrative that's the problem." Okay, so I think this is really interesting because the documentary has a particular argument about Amy and Amy's death and the people around her and the network that just wasn't there for her. Certainly, Mitch, um, is blamed for not doing enough to protect his own daughter from this. It's interesting the way that Mitch is actually arguing against the filmmaking and argument. What Mitch actually wants is hagiography. Hagiography being that thing where all you see is a celebration of something, of a text, right? You don't see anything critical. And because the film is making a critical statement about the film, making a critical statement about Amy, that's what he has a problem with. Because in that criticism, of course, he is identified, right? So the question when you're watching the film is, does the film betray the family? Does it have a duty of care? Who does it have a duty of care to, right? And is that a good thing if the film does betray the family? Now, Mitch thinks that Amy isn't portrayed in a very good light. I would actually, I'll challenge that view. I think Amy is actually portrayed in a very good light. I mean, she's portrayed as this immense talent and this beautiful person who, was able to create beautiful art. And she had problems with drugs and alcohol, like so many people have problems with drugs and alcohol. And I don't actually think, although it exposes the truth to her addiction, I don't actually think it portrays her in a negative way. I think it portrays her in a positive way. Um, you might think of a film like Give Me Shelter, which is a very interesting film about the Rolling Stones, in that you see the Rolling Stones in that film in a very kind of positive, professional way. You don't see them taking drugs. You don't see, the problems of substance abuse that was clearly a part of the Rolling Stones during that period. So it's very guarded almost of the Rolling Stones. The film isn't guarded like that, and comparing a film like Gimme Shelter to a film like Amy is really quite fascinating when you think about how exposed everything is in this film. And you might want to think about, can they actually expose that in ways because Amy isn't alive and she's not actually wanting to fight to protect her own identity, which again asks, is the film fair to Amy? So, as if Capadia, he's the director. Now, he's not an Amy fanboy, and I think that's really important. That, this isn't a fan that's come to make a film about Amy Winehouse, right? There's been a number of Kurt Cobain documentaries. One quite recently called Montage of Heck, which I think would all agree is probably the worst titled film ever, even though it is actually from a Nirvana lyrics, but it's still a shockingly titled film. That's a film made by a fan, and it's a film made by a fan because the fan is only going to say so much. The fan is only going to go so far. So in a film like that, for instance, he doesn't challenge or confront Courtney Love, Kurt's wife at the time, for the active or inactive role she played in Kurt's death. And this film is really a lot tougher than that. And I think it's because Capadia, he's not an Amy fanboy. He's not actually trying to celebrate Amy in a very sort of way of sort of hagiography. He's actually trying to expose the truth of actually what's going on in the world of Amy Winehouse, right? Now, I think it's important to know how the film came about. So, Universal Music instigated the documentary. Now, Mitch, Amy's dad, was a fan of As If Capadia. There's a film Capadia made called Senna, which is actually about the race car driver Senna. And again, that's another film I had no interest in seeing until everyone's telling me how fantastic the film was. So I went and saw it. And I never thought I could be as riveted by a film about car racing as I was. It's a wonderful film, and Mitch wanted um, Capadia to do a similar thing with Amy, right? So he wanted the same treatment to be given to his late daughter's documentary, right? And he signed over all of the footage that he had. He signed over everything to Capadia to make this film. Now, Mitch was extremely unhappy with how the film portrayed him, feeling he'd been portrayed as the villain of the film. And think about that when you're watching the film. Is there a villain in the film? Who is the villain? How is Mitch portrayed? And Mitch did threaten legal action, and some changes were made to the release film. So there was a compromise made. Mitch, of course, wanted a lot more changes made. Essentially, he wanted all of the stuff featuring him removed from the film. Um, the filmmakers refused. They made a couple of changes, but they kept the rest of the film intact. So think about that with who the film was for, the social actors, the respect for particular people around Amy, and the way that if a social actor is portrayed poorly, how that actually affects and impacts their life, and what sort of ethical responsibility does the filmmaker have to that. Now, Mitch claimed that Capadia had an agenda to make him the anti-hero from the start. So the question really is the film balanced? Do we actually get a fair, a fair look at both sides of this argument? Capadia said this: when we were approached to make the film, we came on board with the full backing of the Winehouse family, and we approached the project with total objectivity. So, is the film objective? And that's something to really think about. Capadia interviewed about 100 people in Amy's life, and they appear across the film. And what's really interesting about the film is you hear one person say one thing, and then that's completely contradicted by the footage that we're seeing or by the next person being interviewed. So there's a lot of contradiction going on in this film. It is not just a one view kind of film, which uh, I think is really interesting, and it's really riveting because, again, it's kind of like whose side do I actually take here? Even though I think clearly the side that we all end up taking is Amy, because she's the tragedy of the story, and she's the one that we really empathise with here because she's the victim of the story. Now, Mitch, Amy's dad, he's announced that he's actually going to make his own Amy Winehouse movie. It's going to be called A Letter to Amy. He's going to make it with Amy's ex-boyfriend Reg Travis. So let's sort of watch this space for that. And he said it's a more accurate project to correct all the wrongs and omissions that are in Capadia's film. So it's actually going to be a film made in response to the film. So you might want to think about why they would want to wrong the problems of this film, and if that's even necessary, and why they would be so furious with the film in the way that the film portrays them. Now, the real question is the film fair to Amy? This is the center of the film. Does it exploit her? And some people think that it has exploited her. It's fetishized her. It's sort of made her. It's basically exposed her in ways that she never wanted to be exposed. I mean, in the interviews, the archival footage interviews that you see of Amy, she's often talking about that she doesn't want the life of a celebrity. She just wants to be a musician. She wants to play her music and be left alone. And the problem of celebrity is often you can't get a little bit pregnant. You're in or you're not in at all. And that's, in a way, the tragedy of Amy's life, that she wants the art but not the celebrity. Now, Capadia said this: we all know how this ended. Everybody in the world knows that it ended badly. It wasn't going to be a surprise that we were going to have to deal with some of this stuff because it sadly all happened very publicly in the newspapers. So that's a kind of what the film is exposing, the way that the film is exposing the public life of Amy Winehouse as opposed to the public life of Amy Winehouse, and the way that the two weren't actually as separated as we might think, that they were actually quite connected. Capadia also said there's a lot of stuff we heard that isn't in the film. There's a lot of stuff we've seen that isn't in the film, mainly because our job was to find the right balance to show enough so you knew what was going on, but without overstepping the mark. So I think that's also interesting that he said the film could have actually been a lot more negative than it is, and it's not, and he was trying to find a balance at all times. Now, I actually don't think the film exploits Amy. I think what the film does, and really effectively, is it deals with exploitation, right? It exposes the exploitation of Amy during her life, not the exploitation of Amy after her life. The exploitation of her, the way she was being exploited by her manager, by her father, the way that she was being used as a commodity, right, by the manager and the father, the way that Amy at times clearly should not have been continuing with the music and the touring and the concerts and all of that. She needed to be in some serious rehab and take some serious time away, right? And the footage that they have of this and the way that this is spoken is so tragic because we know where the film is actually going and what's actually happening. So it talks about that exploitation, but it also talks about the public exploitation. Like the film is it's a great piece of it's a great essay on editing and the effective editing. And you've got a lot of these talk show hosts and they're making gags across the film. This is when Amy's alive about Amy and the kind of the train wreck of her life and everything that's going on. And then you're cutting that with footage and images of Amy's death. And the talk show hosts seem really distasteful in the way that they're just they're so callously just using Amy as a point of reference for their gags. And I think that's really interesting as well in the exploitation and how everybody in this story is actually complicit in Amy's death. And, the fans for wanting so much and not leaving Amy alone, the media certainly, and also the father and manager. So it's expository conventions is sort of there in the film. It's kind of used in interesting ways. I mean, there are voiceovers. Obviously, the interviews are used as voiceovers, so we don't have talking heads in the film, but we have a lot of interviews spliced over the footage, right? So you don't have the voice of God commentator, the one commentator heard across the film. You have many, and the voiceover is kind of used almost to contradict each other, right? So the images are used to sort of counterpoint the voiceover. The editing is used for continuity to link together images that support the argument put forward in the voiceover or not, which is certainly the case with this film. And you also here get a variety of footage, interviews, stills archive is assembled to support the argument. And the argument isn't the argument of the voiceover, it's actually the argument of the film, in that the way that all of these people were complicit in Amy's death. And also, it's a tragedy in the way that Amy was never left alone to just create her art. It's a sort of an observational film as well. Like it's not observational in the classical ways, like a film like I don't know, Give Me Shelter, or the famous film with Bob Dylan, Don't Look Back. But the way that the home footage is used, it's kind of used. It's in some points. I mean, I know Amy, many times is actually interacting directly with the camera, but often the cameras are just there, just filming Amy at work, just doing what Amy does. So there is this observational thing going on with a lot of the footage where Amy never thought that, this home footage would be used in a documentary of her life, but it's sort of there, and the camera is always on her, and I think she just got so used to cameras being there that at times she sort of ignores them. And so think about the way that the home footage sort of takes on these observational conventions. Now, the film's construction is really interesting as well, and really concentrate on that when you're watching the film. The editing is fast, like it's super, super fast. And I would actually argue that the editing is it sort of takes on this style to give you a sense of Amy's schematic life, that it's just constantly jumping around from, different people, different places, and it's just very hard to get a focus on the film because Amy herself couldn't get a focus on the film. And again, that really allows us to identify with her. The documentary does include interviews, like I said. Think about who is being interviewed. Why are they being used as a voiceover? Why don't we actually see their eyes, their faces? What happens when you lose that in an interview, when you don't actually see what the person is saying? I think that's really interesting. In a way, when you're hearing the voiceover, often these people are coming across as very cold and very removed and very distant, which may not be the case if we had seen them, if we actually had the emotion of the face to go with the voice. But I think that's again of this haunting idea of the film and the way that it's really making everyone complicit. Um, what's really interesting about the interviews also is that everyone's trying to exonerate themselves from any wrongdoing here. Everyone's trying to say, hey, it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my fault. And that's really interesting, kind of ethically as well, that often these people, they're not actually talking about Amy, they're talking about themselves and, that they did nothing wrong. Um, the sort of how are we aware of the documentary maker? I think by the way that the footage of what footage is shown and how it is shown. So it's not like the documentary maker has to be on screen or we have to hear them. It's actually about what footage is shown and how is the film constructed and the argument of the film through the editing. The sound, so think of the different types of sounds that are used. What is the effect of the music that we have? So often the film is constantly cutting to Amy singing her songs. The lyrics of her songs are put on the screen. I think almost to say, hey, this is a talent. This is a person who could actually write a song. She wasn't um, she wasn't just some run of the mill pop star. She was someone who could write a lyric, she could perform the lyric, and she was really, really super in what she was actually doing. Think about the relationship between the voiceover and the image and the way that often the film is trying to contradict what we're seeing and what we're hearing. And does the image illustrate what the voiceover says? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You never get a clear sense of that. So, final thought, how does the film make us empathize with Amy? We really, really, the film is moving, and it's only moving because we actually really empathize with Amy. She's not given a right of reply. She's the one who this film is about, but she is not given the right of reply. So you have all of these people across the film telling us how they did nothing wrong, that it wasn't their fault, right? But you don't actually hear that from Amy, and it's about the way that she is trapped and she is controlled by her support team. You hear that in the interviews that she does, where she just wants out of this world, but she can't because the celebrity and the fact that she is a bankroll for a lot of these people in her life, they will not let her just walk away. It's a terribly sad film, really, about celebrity. The film is not hagiography. Like I said, hagiography is when you celebrate something in a way without ever criticizing it. It does criticize those close to her, and in a way, it kind of criticizes Amy for not walking away from those close to her. The film is really about the editing, right? What you see and how it is shown, and think about that. That this is it's a masterwork in editing, in film editing, and the way that the film is constantly contradicting the people around her, and that the way that the argument of the film is really being shaped and molded through how you see, and what you hear, both through Amy's music and the interviews of the film. Okay, I'll leave it there. Amy, hell of a film, won the Academy Award, rightly so, I would say, because it's extremely moving, it's extremely haunting. It's a film that I think will stay with you for a long time, but it's just a really great piece of filmmaking. Okay, leave it there. Look forward to talking with you more about it soon.